Over to Gina Tallarico, the Executive Director here at St. Francis Center for Renewal.
Thank you, Marianne. Thanks for getting us all set up this morning. I have the pleasure of introducing Marie North to you today. Welcome, first of all, to this program. This has been a journey for all of us, including Marie. We started planning really what we thought was going to be an on-site program, and then unfortunately COVID-19 took over. So what we had anticipated doing and what we planned for throughout the year has really been reduced. But I think it's going to be time well spent in terms of really broadening our knowledge around Laudato Si. What does that mean, and why is it important? So Marie, thank you. Thank you for all of your efforts this year in trying to help to get this moving. Marie North has been involved with sustainability for many years and became a certified sustainable building advisor in 2011. She provides consulting services and offers presentations on achieving sustainability in everyday life through her website, Translating Sustainable, all one word, translatingsustainable.com. In early 2018, she became a Laudato Si animator to help faith communities initiate sustainable practices in their places of worship, schools, and other facilities. Her life experiences and Catholic faith are instrumental in her work to be a voice for a healthy planet. She is inspired by the unwavering commitment of the sisters and staff at the St. Francis Center for Renewal to help her develop and offer a Laudato Si workshop for their retreat center community and for faith communities throughout the Lehigh Valley. Marie is a member of various sustainability organizations in and around the Lehigh Valley. She lives in a sustainably built, energy efficient home located in a certified Pennsylvania stewardship forest with her husband and one inquisitive cat. She has a daughter who is also involved in the sustainability field. She's always a student of this ever-evolving topic and is constantly expanding her knowledge in key areas of sustainability. Her other interests include landscaping with native plants, birds, hiking, and travel. Having read and studied Laudato Si On Care for Our Common Home, her opinion about Pope Francis's encyclical is, he gets it. So thank you, Marie. Without further ado, I want to say on behalf of the sisters and the staff at the Center for Renewal, we're grateful that you're here with us today.
Thanks very much, Gina. I am thrilled to be here. It has been a wonderful journey to work with all of you. We worked well together. We fed each other good information and good feedback. And I think that's what's helped to bring this together in this way, and the positive energy of all of the people at the St. Francis Center who desperately wanted to bring a Laudato Si program and a Healing the Earth program to the people that they minister to. So this is a great opportunity. I certainly appreciate it. I'd like to welcome everyone to Why Laudato Si and Why Should We Care? I'm excited to be offering this webinar during Laudato Si Week 2020, where we are honoring the 5th anniversary of Pope Francis's encyclical, Laudato Si On Care for Our Common Home. If you hear bird sounds, they are real. I am out on my porch in the middle of my stewardship forest, and so I thought it was appropriate to be outdoors, to offer this outdoors. And I don't think they're going to get too loud, hopefully not, but I think it's a pleasant background sound for what we're going to be talking about today. I definitely want to thank Gina and Marianne Kearns, who is my tech guru here, and she will be advancing the slides for me because she is much better versed in Zoom than I am. So she and I will be working together. And I want to thank the sisters who are so excited about this and were unwavering in wanting to do this program. And I've enjoyed working with them tremendously. And I also want to thank Jan, the marketing director at the center, who sent out all the flyers and put out all the information so that people would know about this webinar that we're doing. I also have a few items of note. As I move through my slides, you will see some words that are highlighted in yellow. And I'll try to define them during the presentation, but all of you will receive a list of definitions via email sometime next week. So you don't have to scribble and try and write them down. Some of them you may already be familiar with, but you will receive that list. And you'll also receive a list of resources next week for some of the items that I may be referring to in this PowerPoint, where you can get more information about how you can be more sustainable. We're going to ask that you hold your questions till the end. If you're familiar with the chat box, you can certainly put them in at any time, but I will answer those questions at the end of the webinar. And if we don't have time, you can certainly email them to me or email them to Marianne, and she'll forward them to me. I'm going to read something from Laudato Si to begin this webinar, which I think will help us to understand a bit of where we are going. I'm going to give you an introduction to St. Francis. I think probably most of you here are familiar with him, but I'm still going to do this because I just love what this says in Laudato Si. St. Francis is the patron saint of all who study and work in the area of ecology, and he is also much loved by non-Christians. And I can say I've been doing a lot of praying at different times to St. Francis. He was particularly concerned for God's creation and for the poor and outcast. He loved and was deeply loved for his joy, his generous self-giving, his open-heartedness. He was a mystic and a pilgrim who lived in simplicity and in wonderful harmony with God, with others, with nature, and with himself. He shows us just how inseparable the bond is between concern for nature, justice for the poor, commitment to society, and interior peace. And it continues here with Pope Francis saying, if we approach nature and the environment with his openness to awe and wonder, if we no longer speak the language of fraternity and beauty in our relationship with the world, our attitude will be that of masters, consumers, ruthless exploiters, unable to set limits on their immediate needs. And so some of this is what we will be addressing today. And Marianne, I think we need to start our slides.
Is it showing?
Okay. And the next one?
Whoops. Is this it?
We're going to begin with a prayer that I think all of us can relate to. And I will read it out loud. Please, read along to yourselves as we move through this prayer. And it is a prayer for our common home. Creator God, please guide us. Help us to act in love and courage to honor you, O Creator, and to fulfill our role as protectors of the earth, our common home. The poor in the earth are crying out. O Lord, seize us with your power and light. Help us to protect all life, to prepare for a better future, for the coming of your kingdom of justice, peace, love, and beauty. Amen. Okay, and the other thing I want to mention before I leave this prayer slide is that the World Day of Prayer for Laudato Si Week, which is what we are in the middle of right now. The World Day of Prayer will be this Friday, May 24th at noon local time. And you can find that just, I believe, by going on to laudatosi.org. But that I wanted to make note of that so that you are aware of it. May 24th will be the last day of Laudato Si Week, which began last Sunday. Okay, let's go to the next slide. If you received, and I'm assuming all of you did receive our notice about this webinar where we talked about, where the title was On Care for Laudato, looking through the lens of Laudato Si. on care for our common home, and why Laudato Si, and why should we care? And I have these bullet points here to show you just exactly what we're going to be covering today. But concern for the health of humanity and the earth was talked about a lot during Laudato Si Week. I was fortunate to be able to attend some of the webinars that were held around the world. And I can't tell you what a great experience that is to be participating in programs where people are from Africa, Australia, Ireland, all over Europe. They're from the United States. Some people were from South America. And we're all interacting and listening to this program, to the programs together. So this is something that came from about Laudato Si Week. 2020 occasions the 5th anniversary of Laudato Si, which was signed on May 24th, 2015. Pope Francis's encyclical on care for our common home, Laudato Si, is an inspiration during moments of difficulty. It encourages us to reflect on the values we share and create a more just and sustainable future. The theme of Laudato Si Week is everything is connected. During Laudato Si Week, we come together as one people around the world to prayerfully discern the lessons of this moment. While the world experiences a history-defining crisis, we reflect and prepare to build a better world. Laudato Si has been welcomed as a document of deep and abiding beauty, and it has prompted people around the world to reflect more deeply on Creator and creation. Its vision of integral ecology, which seeks connections between how we treat God, nature, and each other, offers simple but profound truths about the bonds that unite us. So as I said, I tried to take a look at why Laudato Si, why should we care through the lens and look at it from COVID-19, what we're experiencing now, our need for health and well-being, and our need for the same during everyday life on Earth. Okay, next slide. This quote I took from Laudato Si, and it is the theme, if you will, of what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to be using different sections of this quote and refer to it as we move through the PowerPoint. The gravity of the ecological crisis demands that we all look to the common good, embarking on a path of dialogue which demands patience, self-discipline, and generosity, always keeping in mind that realities are greater than ideas. The words that I will be focusing on are gravity and patience, self-discipline, and generosity. Okay, next slide. During our current pandemic, we were overwhelmed, we were unprepared, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. But the one thing we did learn is that we needed each other to get through this time, and we continue to need each other. I was taken by a quote from the late Fred Rogers. Any of you that had children who watched, and they watched Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood knows who I'm talking about. And Mr. Rogers said that his mother told him this when he was a child, and he was asking her, what do I do in a dangerous situation? What do I do if I'm alone? And she told him, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. And isn't that the truth with the current pandemic? When we looked around, there were so many people stepping up to the plate, realizing that they had an important job to do, or that they had something to offer, and they did it. So we definitely had helpers during this pandemic. And we are familiar with the hashtags, alone together, or we are all in this together, which again reflects back to the eco-crisis. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but we're all in this together. Next slide. The gravity of COVID-19. We can pretty much say that we, as ordinary citizens, were unprepared for this pandemic. We had limited knowledge of the virus. We had limited medical supplies to deal with it. We then had exhausted medical and essential personnel, which led to many sick and dying people. There were definitely epidemiologists out there and others who study pandemics and epidemics. They had the knowledge, we didn't. And so we were in a grave situation, and to some degree continue to be in that today. Next slide. Here are the realities during COVID-19. It has been approximately 2 months, maybe 2.5 months, since we started our self-quarantine and were asked to do a number of things, which are listed on this particular slide. And in that time, we did many things, from not knowing how to deal with a pandemic. In 2.5 months, we learned to be patient, we had to have some self-discipline, and we learned to be generous. And so from staying at home, through helping our neighbor, homemade masks, essential workers going the extra mile, manufacturers reconfiguring equipment to make necessary things. We learned how to teach online classes, and online worship services were offered. And we're now learning all about webinars and the importance of them with the type of thing we're doing today. There were people who rescued crops that would have rotted in the field and distributed them to those in need. Loan forbearance has been talked about, and we learned how to create celebrations for those who can't visit with family. And all of this has gone on and on and on. So it's amazing what we were able to do, and I will talk about this often, in 2.5 months. Next slide. So now I'll come to the circle diagram of the gravity of the eco-crisis to everyday life. I'm going to start with the degradation of land and water. And what I mean there is unfettered development, or degradation that is happening in countries where they have little control about what happens to their land and their forests. And what happens with that, and why it's important to our health and well-being, is that it can lead to vital ecosystems being destroyed, which creates poor air quality, water pollution, and soil erosion. It affects the food and clean water and health and livelihoods of many people, which leads to illness, disease, and poverty, especially in countries that don't have the infrastructures that we have in place. It can also happen here, but I'm thinking about some of the other countries around the world that suffer because of things that are happening that are beyond their control. Next slide. Okay, so St. Francis, excuse me, St. Francis says, regrettably, many efforts to seek the concrete solutions that we need to the environmental crisis have proven ineffective. And it's not just because of powerful opposition, but it's also because of a more general lack of interest. And the general lack of interest has to do with the lack of interest by everyday people, by you and I. Next slide. Okay, most of us, I'm going to assume, that are on this webinar live in the Lehigh Valley, and if you live around the Lehigh Valley. You know that we have had rapid land development within the past few years. And when that happens, we've heard a lot of people saying, well, what will happen to our good farmland? And we are losing that at a rapid pace. When we think of that, we also think about all of the warehouses that have popped up all around the Lehigh Valley. And when we have a lot of that type of construction with large roofs, large parking lots, large roadways, more concrete, and with our own lives, the more patio surfaces, the more hard surfaces that we add to our property, it creates what's called impervious surfaces. And impervious means that the water cannot infiltrate and runs off of those surfaces, which leads to more stormwater runoff. And we'll get into that a bit more with a video at the end of this webinar. And what that leads to is less recharge of aquifers, which are huge storehouses of water underground that we probably don't even think about and many people don't know exist. But that's what gives us the water for our wells and a lot of our drinking water. When we lose beneficial vegetation, we are losing things that clean the air and the water, and that when they break down, they promote rich soils. And I have to talk about the uninformed and prolific use of chemical fertilizers and other chemicals. I'm sure all of you have heard the expression, well, if less is good, more is better. And that is not the case. So when I say uninformed, I am talking here a lot of times about the homeowner who can readily buy a number of these things and applies them and then applies the if less is good, more is better, which can contaminate soil, migrate into streams and rivers and bays and oceans. And the words here that I've highlighted, herbicides, are chemicals that kill vegetation, and insecticides is obvious, chemical that would kill insects, damaging insects, and sometimes beneficial insects as well. Next slide. Pope Francis again makes this quote from Laudato Si in assessing the environmental impact of a project. Concern is usually shown for the effects on soil and water and air. And he is right about that, especially in the United States. We have regulations. Sometimes those rules are bent a bit, and that can lead to problems, but we definitely have more regulations and concern to that. But we have few careful studies are done about the impact on biodiversity and the loss of species or animals and plant groups. And we have little concern for that. And I think it's because we have little knowledge of it. When we bought our property where I am hosting from today, we had a vegetation survey done. And there are people out there who do this type of thing. Obviously we knew we were moving into a wooded area. We wanted to know about native plants. We wanted to know about non-native plants. We wanted to know what types of trees are growing here and have them ID'd. We were also wondering about the type of wildlife that was here. So by doing a vegetation survey, we learned about the biodiversity of this property and where we sited our home and how we put in different surfaces. We thought about that survey as we did those types of things to try and minimize the impact to the various communities on this property. Next slide. So when we talk about land degradation, the next thing in the circle was vital ecosystems can be destroyed. And I know the first thing that comes to mind are the forests around the globe, but especially in the Amazon. And we all know that there are vital ecosystems there. And we see that word highlighted here. And ecosystems are a body of land which include plants, animals, and other organisms that interact with each other. They need each other. And they are all over. You have an ecosystem most likely somewhere on the property where you live. And they do include native plant communities, birds, beneficial insects, pollinators, those that pollinate the different plants that we need, and especially food plants and trees. They are a necessary part of our life, our livelihoods and our lives and our food. And they are also impacted if we are not careful with ecosystems. When we destroy vital ecosystems, we also affect migration of birds and animals, and they have a set system. And when we disrupt that, they have to quickly adjust or they die. Marshlands, wetlands, and bogs. Marshlands, I think we can be more familiar with when we think about Hurricane Katrina, because we heard often there that the marshlands around New Orleans have been greatly diminished. Marshlands protect the coastlines. And when we diminish them, the full force of wind and water is impacted on the, it makes the land impacted from those storms. So the marshlands, we have learned, are very critical and very important to coastal communities. Wetlands and bogs are important on various properties, and where we find those little seeps or we find vernal ponds, because various types of amphibians and frogs and toads, they live in those communities and are also part of the ecosystem. We talked about, I just mentioned, pardon me, about the ocean life communities and coral reefs. Well, the ocean life also includes what's in the sea, and that when we are not careful with what we do, the livelihood of people who fish, the life of the sea creatures themselves, food sources for the sea creatures and humans, all of those are affected. The evolution of ecosystems is slower and more complex than rapid development. And that's something we have to keep in mind. We move quickly, and we are able to do that because of larger machinery, because of things that we have developed and technology we've developed. But nature has its own pace, and it moves much more slowly than we do. And in the end, creates a very diverse ecosystem, a healthier ecosystem. So when we do things, we need to keep that in mind. Next slide. So the next circle was the poor air quality, water pollution, and erosion. We, I think, pretty much know from basic biology that when we lose trees and vegetation, we are impacting clean air for all, because the trees take in that carbon dioxide, clean our air, and present us with cleaner air. And we know from research that less trees in cities and poor communities means those people are exposed to more noise, but they're also exposed to air pollution, which has a very negative impact on those communities. We have to keep in mind that trees and beneficial vegetation retain soils and help with water infiltration. And that is extremely important when we think about erosion of soils and pollutions of streams, because the trees help to filter the water and keep it in place on the property. And when we lose that, we also need to think about erosion along streams and riverbanks, because the erosion can lead to more flooding in an area, but also downstream. And whatever we deposit on land, if it's done improperly, not just if less is good, more is better chemicals, but also trash, cigarette butts, plastics, all kinds of plastics, including single-use, food wrappers, anything that we carelessly throw on the ground or that may get blown there on trash day. If we don't pick that up, there's a good possibility that some of these items are going to land be washed into our waterways and create problems downstream. And some of you may have received the flyer about the workshop we were going to do in person during Earth Day week, and we had mentioned there the MS4 regulations that some of the nonprofits would be experiencing, and they have to do with storm water runoff and those communities having to mitigate stormwater runoff. Next slide. So again, the next circle, we are affecting food, water, and health with degradation of land. And contaminated water is a huge problem, especially in developing and poorer countries where water treatment systems are not as readily available and certainly are nothing like what we have here. Chemicals that are added to soils and crops, which is interesting, and they're learning more about this, can drift and contaminate other farms and other crops and can be retained in the soil. And when land is degraded and not protected from industry and its byproducts, we all suffer, but especially those who live close to chemical plants, power plants, land or the refuse and recycling types of businesses if they are not well regulated. And that's why we have some of the regulations that we have in this country. And people balk at that, and it does add to the cost of some of the things that we use. But what is the larger cost to the environment when it means that we as humans and the other things that live on Earth are also suffering, and it brings diseases upon us, which increases medical costs, and on it goes. I think you can all figure that out. And we need to include that the suffering can go beyond humans and include the health of farm animals, again, affecting livelihood of not just the farmers in developed countries, but also people in developing countries. Next slide. And this was our last circle, illness, disease, and poverty. And I touched on that a bit. But again, I go back to some of the regulations that we have in place in regard to chemicals. If they're not properly disposed of, or if we don't properly vent them into the atmosphere, there is definite proof of an increased cause in cancer. Asthma and heart disease are directly related to pollutants in the air, especially from fossil fuels. And as I said, communities in close proximity, they suffer the most. And especially in areas of unregulated manufacturing and pollutants. In undeveloped countries, they don't have the infrastructure or regulations that we have. So their living conditions many times are unsanitary, unsafe, and the poverty is extreme. So we think back to, okay, who in the world, what countries are using most of our resources? And the more developed countries definitely are. And so when we say, how can I help people in these undeveloped countries? How can I help their part of the earth? How can I help them live a more healthy life? Which is something Pope Francis refers to often. It starts with us. And we'll go into that a little bit more about some of the things that we can do. Next slide. So we have an urgent challenge, and those words come from Pope Francis and from the encyclical itself. And I'm thinking informed dialogue and thoughtful action is something that we need to take to heart, because we can be better stewards. Next slide. And right now, I'm going to pass along this webinar to Sister Bonnie, who is involved with the Monocacy Farm Project, and we're going to learn about how they have become better stewards of their farmland and for the programs that the St. Francis Center for Renewal offers. So, Sister Bonnie.
Good morning, everybody. I was really excited when Marie invited me to be a part of this. And when I say invited me to be a part, I'm really saying that I was excited because she was really inviting the School Sisters of St. Francis. I'm the director of the Monocacy Farm Project, but it really belongs to all of us. And it began in response to an event, a life-changing event that we experienced in 2012. So I'm going to share my screen and tell you a little bit about what the sisters experienced in 2012. I'm not as adept as Marianne is at this, so you have to excuse me for looking around for where do I do this. So in 2012, the sisters sold some acreage at Monocacy Manor. Monocacy Manor was formerly owned by a vice president of the Bethlehem Steel, and he started his estate in 19 something. We have an old farmhouse that I'm sitting in right now that was built somewhere around 1918 or so. And the rest of the property grew up around that. This was a full working farm at the time. But long story short, we needed to sell off some of the original 124 or so acres. And we ended up selling 68 of those acres to a developer. And right next to where I am, there's 204 home development for seniors. And we knew that that would have an impact, an environmental impact, a neighborhood impact, and we needed to make some decisions after the sale of that property about what we would do with some of the remaining property. I think it's interesting, at least to the sisters, I believe, that in 2011, we had a general chapter in Rome. That's a general chapter is a meeting of all the school sisters of St. Francis around the world to make decisions for our life and mission and ministry for the next 5 years. And part of that was a mandate to show care for the earth and to do it in specific ways. So when we sold the 68 acres in 2012, we knew that we needed to look at the remaining property in light of this, particularly the farmland. And so through that, the Monocacy Farm Project came to be, and the project began in the early spring of 2013. In 2014, it really began to take off and begin with the major activity of the project. So why did we do this? Well, we wanted to use our land in keeping with Franciscan tradition and mission. We wanted to stay true to that tradition, and we wanted to re-engage ourselves in that Franciscan community, or Francis would have said fraternity, that all things and all people are related and in relation with one another, our relationship with God, with one another, and with creation. We wanted to care and to be good stewards of that creation. And we wanted in the long term, and this really evolved, all these whys weren't at once, but we wanted to integrate with the ministry of our retreat center, St. Francis Center for Renewal, and in turn to expand retreat center offerings to include offerings on sustainability and nutrition and social responsibility, environmental responsibility. And so our mission, the Monocacy Farm Project, seeks to use land and resources at Monocacy Manor in the Franciscan tradition to model stewardship and care of the earth, foster community involvement, provide educational opportunities, and serve the needs of the poor. The timeline of this, if I can just go back to that, Marie invited us to speak in light of Laudato Si. And Laudato Si, as she mentioned, came out in 2015, the actual encyclical. But, when you think about it, Pope Francis had to be writing this prior. He was elected in 2013. So at the time that we began in 2013 with our baby steps, he was probably beginning to write the encyclical, at least to put the thoughts together. And so I find that very encouraging and affirming that we were on the right path. So what did we want to have as results for all this? Well, we wanted to be able to offer instruction in organic gardening, and nutrition, sustainable living programs. The outreach to the community, to the broader community, particularly to the poor, was very important to us. We're educators. Our name tells you that, School Sisters of St. Francis. And so we wanted to be able to take this into the schools. And as I mentioned before, to develop new retreat programs. We wanted to see specific ecological benefits. And we wanted not just to serve the poor, but to increase the access of high quality and safe produce to everyone in our neighborhood, but with a focus on those of lower economic means. So I was thinking that you would like to see the fields. And Eli, our new project manager, will speak a little bit later. And we weren't sure if he would be able to film. He's on with us in the shed out on the field on his laptop. But I have a video that was produced a couple of years ago, so it is dated, and our former project manager speaks on it, but it'll at least give you an idea of what things look like out there now.
Hi, my name is Bob Drake. I'm the project manager for the Monocacy Farm Project. The Monocacy Farm dedicates half of its growing space, half of its production areas, for growing vegetables for donation to food pantries, homeless shelters, and soup kitchens. We currently service and support 10 such organizations in Easton, Bethlehem, and Allentown. The project is supported by a number of organizations, churches, Knights of Columbus councils, and individual volunteers who assist with harvesting, planting, weeding, and every aspect of farming in order to produce the vegetables that we donate.
So how do we do this? What's involved? The components, so to speak, that make up the farm. We have a list here. It's not all inclusive, and I'll talk about some things that are not on the list as well. But we do have an organic demonstration and production farm. So there are sections of the farm that will be set aside specifically for instruction. And then the production farm, we donate, as Bob mentioned, half of what we produce roughly to soup kitchens, pantries, and shelters in the area. He said there were 10, there are now 12. And I think that might grow. We would love to be able to, offer more, especially now with the COVID crisis. We're a little bit limited though, because our volunteers are limited. So, with God's help, we'll be able to at least give what we had given in the past, but we would love to do more. We have a greenhouse, which has been a real blessing. When the project really first started, we were running around the Lehigh Valley putting our starts in everybody else's greenhouses, and that took up a lot of time, and there was a financial investment in that as well. Through the generosity of some of our donors, we are able to have a cold room in the shed where Eli's sitting. He's not in the cold room, at least I hope he's not, because in the first year, the first growing season, we had to harvest and take the produce directly to the soup kitchens and pantries and shelters, and that wasn't very efficient. So now, excuse me, Eli and Anton can harvest earlier with the help of the volunteers, and they can store that temporarily in the cold room for pickup or delivery. We have beehives as part of the project. Everybody knows that we wouldn't be here if it weren't for the bees. The community gardens, where people can come if they want to grow their own vegetables and flowers and they don't have the ability to do that at home, they can come here. We do ask for a donation for that, and that helps us with the ministry part, with the giving away and donation of the produce. We also have some flower gardens and trails on the property that our retreatants make use of. And then coming soon, we're going to go solar, and Eli will tell you a little bit more about that. Some things that are missing from this list, Marie mentioned when she was speaking about the need to re-inject water into the aquifers. We do have a well. We grow everything according to organic principles. We're not certified because of the costs involved in that, but we do follow those principles. So having well water is a real blessing. And the farm area is large. It's about 6.5 acres. So We have faucets around, I think there are 7 of them that are located in different areas so that it makes it easier to do the watering, both for the community gardeners and for our staff. We also last year began a Pick Your Own program. That Pick Your Own program has a membership associated with it. You pay a nominal fee to become a member, and then whenever you come to harvest your own produce, you make a donation based on what you can afford. And again, those donations go to helping us to keep the project going. So how do we do all this? With people power, we have 2 full-time employees, myself as project director and Eli as the new project manager. We have a part-time farmer. His name is Anton. He works out in the field with Eli, and a fundraising coordinator who also does about 10 hours a week in helping us to acquire donations. And she starts, with her preparations for the Monocacy Farm Food Festival, which I'm not sure how that's going to go this year. That's usually in the early fall. We've had unpaid interns helping us, and then the volunteers. Without our volunteers, we would not be able to do what we do. Our friends, our neighbors, scout troops, high school students with their service projects, college students, and really and truly this has become an ecumenical endeavor. There are many churches, synagogues that are involved with us. One of them you'll meet later after Eli speaks. His name is Rabbi Singer. He's from the synagogue up the road. And so let me go to the next slide. And this is our current staff. Sitting right above me to my left is Eli, our new project manager. Amy, our fundraising coordinator, is under the roof of the tractor, and our former manager and now board member is Bob Drake. And with this, I am going to turn this over to Eli, who can tell you a little bit about the soil, which Marie started, whetting our appetite to learn about that, and also about the solar project.
Hi, you cut out right at the very end there, Mr. Bonnie, but I think it's my turn now. Hi, everyone. Okay, great. Thanks for coming. I would have loved for this to be able to be in person so I could really take you on a farm tour, and I'm hoping to maybe do a little bit of that here, and we're going to see how it goes. But in general, one of the things, thank you, Marie, for your presentation and for really exploring so many of these very important themes about sort of ecological effects and how they relate to our society and our personal health. And one of the things that I've been thinking about that's probably pretty relevant to a lot of people is coverings, and that when we're wearing masks right now, this is a way that we're both protecting ourselves but also protecting others. And I was just looking out the window while we were talking about this and thinking about that, and there's several different ways that we're doing covering that is both for protecting the soil and conserving the water resources and preventing, it's not really infection, but sort of invasion of these weeds and things that might sort of move in and take over, and also preventing those weeds from growing and then spreading elsewhere. And so it's not a direct one-to-one, but there are some similar themes that we're talking about, and I thought maybe I could take you out and show you some of those things shortly. I will also mention, Sister Bonnie mentioned the water. We're also very fortunate that we have several different water situations here. One is that we have water from the city, which comes from a reservoir up in the Poconos, which is treated and comes lovely and is able to be drank, and we use it to wash our hands regularly. We use it to wash the produce that then we send out to different people to make sure that we're sending safe food. But then we also, as Sister Bonnie said, we have the aquifer underneath us that we are able to dig a well and pull the water there for watering, which is what we're using primarily for irrigation and to keep our seedlings happy and healthy. But we also, with the help of an Eagle Scout project last year, we were able to divert the gutters on the sides of our roof of the greenhouse and actually send the water, which is something you would never do in your house, but we send the water from the gutters into the greenhouse and then fill a large tank there. And so we've been able to water the seedlings in our greenhouse for this beginning of the growing season with fresh rainwater, which is actually the most desirable water we could be using because it's the freshest, it's the most freely available. We're not depleting the aquifer in that, we're just gathering what would have been sloughing off of this impervious surface like Marie talked about, and just adding more to the erosion and the potential sort of like runoff. And we're collecting that and using that water for the purposes of getting our plants started. And they actually love the rainwater a lot better than, you know, the city water that has some of the things that are added to it to make it safe for us to drink. And then I'm not sure if you can hear, there's like sort of a low hum happening in this shed where I'm at. But in part, the reason I'm able to be here right now is because there is a fan that's running up at the vent over here, and it's powered by a solar panel that's about this big, and it's up on the roof, and that's just an exhaust fan that's running here, and you may hear that, but that's one of our first ways in which we've incorporated photovoltaic solar into the project here. Last year that was installed, and it's definitely made the shed here a lot more comfortable for us to be in, but also because the shed is housing the walk-in cooler, the refrigerator that Sister Bonnie mentioned, where we keep the produce cool, keeping the shed itself cooler with that solar power then makes the compressor that cools that walk-in cooler not have to work as hard. Because if this shed is brutally hot, then that thing has to work overtime in order to keep our food cool. And so we're saving some energy there. And then another exciting project on that front that's happening this year is that we're partnering with the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Association, and they have awarded us a grant of donation of solar panels that we're going to cover the rest of our roof here with. And so we're going to have 2,400 watt solar project that's going to be installed here. And the goal had been to sort of have a public workshop where we would invite people to come and participate and have a hands-on sort of approach to putting those panels together and connecting them and getting it set up so that we could generate through that solar power half of the energy needs that we would need for the pump and for the compressor for the cooler and for the other various electrical needs we have here on the farm. And so I guess I talked a little bit about soil, water, and sun, which were some of the things. Now, also in terms of solar, one of the things that I like to emphasize is that photovoltaic is a really brilliant way to take the energy and the light from the sun, which powers, you know, our whole planet, and make it directly accessible to the electronic devices we need. But also we have a whole farm here. And one of the ways I like to think about a farm is it's a big solar powered system. Like all of the plants that we're growing, they utilize that solar energy, and they like basically in certain ways, like that's a more efficient solar system than a photovoltaic panel in terms of like taking the energy from the sun and directly making it into food that we can eat. And we're able to do that with help from the ecosystem and healthy soils and the water that we need. And so with that, I want to sort of like take you outside a little bit and show you some of the things that I mentioned. So I'm going to turn you around. Let's see. There we go. And so I'm walking you out into the field, and you can see these are some of the beds that we've recently laid, and they're covered with a mulch here that has irrigation lines that go underneath it. And we have only just recently put these down, but these will be planted shortly with tomatoes and peppers and things that will appreciate the warmth from the black heat of the sun here. And then walking across to some of the fields that we planted previously, where we have a couple different types of coverings. We have the mulch that I talked about right here that's able to preserve soil moisture, reduce weed pressure for our crops, and then also sort of helpfully delineate the planting bed from the pathways for the public to more easily interact with our farm. And then here you see I planted some zucchini plants just yesterday right here, and hoping that soon we'll have, and there's a little bit of clay dust. You'll see I've covered the leaves in this clay and water solution to help protect them from the earliest cucumber beetles that may come out shortly. And then here I have cabbages and broccoli and kale and collard greens all in these beds, and these have another kind of covering that both supported them during the colder nights over the last month or two when we first planted them, and then also are protecting them from the geese, which we're very fortunate to be here along this wooded portion of the Monocacy Creek, and it's sort of an oasis for a lot of wildlife. And the geese love to come and visit the farm, but they also have previously eaten an entire bed of broccoli seedlings that I planted out. And so this is one method that we've been doing to prevent them from eating our food before we get to. Also, flea beetles are another insect pest that sometimes give us trouble with these brassicas. So this floating row cover, we can cover and then uncover and harvest from. And then over here, you'll see these are actually the fields that we planted last year, and they're with a different kind of cover, which is the cover crop. And so we've planted, a lot of this was sown in the fall and has now grown up to be quite beautiful. We have a mix of different things. There's some crimson clover in there and some triticale and sort of wheat rye mix that is now sort of providing a living cover of this photosynthesizing solar powered plant community that's supporting us in both putting nutrients and organic matter back into the soil, providing some habitat for insects and pollinators, and also just adding back some fertility to these fields that we planted in and harvested from last year, so that next year, when we're ready, we can rest the fields we planted this year, and we can utilize these fields that will have some sort of renewed energy. And I just want to show you one more thing while we're out here. Last fall,
Eli,
I planted
before
some
you do, I'm sorry to
Sure.
interrupt. Would you share a little bit about the condition of the soil when we first started? I know you weren't here, but I know Bob
Sure.
with you about the atrazine and the cover
Yeah.
is so beautiful, but I think it would be good to know the history of that.
Sure. Yeah. I'd be happy to. And thanks for chiming in. It's nice to know that everyone's hearing me and I'm not just talking to me. So as you can see, here's some soil. We've had a lovely week of like drying conditions, but there's been really high clay. And so when it dries out in the sun, it really sort of can really turn into dust, and then when it rains, it can sort of turn into a hard pan. And so we're working on trying to improve it. But my understanding is that it already has definitely improved quite a bit from initially when Bob moved here. I think, it had been cropped and grown in for a long time, as I understand it, with what they call conventional agricultural practices. But that in general, yeah, as Sister Bonnie mentioned, atrazine and maybe some other sort of like chemical farm supports were used that didn't necessarily respect the health or promote the long-term health of the soils in exchange for short-term gains of being able to eliminate certain pests or give certain boosts to the crops that were being grown. And in that way, this transition that we've done to using organic practices in our attempt to sort of support the longer term health of the soil and regenerate it has meant that a soil that initially Bob and Sister Bonnie said, you would dig and there was no earthworms at all. There was nothing really living, that community of life in the soil that helps promote and circulate nutrients through the soil back to the plants, which then goes to us and to our community to circulate those nutrients as necessary food for people, that was really a weak link. And so part of the reason that we're doing the cover cropping and the patient sort of crop rotation and the non-chemical barriers for insect protection and those kind of things is to find other ways of intervening in the system that don't generally sort of take from that. And we still have a long ways to go. It's a long-term project that is decades and potentially generations of work to sort of rehabilitate soils, which is one of the reasons why it's so important to sort of maintain the soils that we have, because it's long-term work. And one of the things that this soil really needs is a lot more organic matter. And so we're trying to grow the cover crop and incorporate that and offer more things for the soil life to feed on and more things for moisture retention in the soil, and sort of add to the clay that naturally is here and give it something else that can sort of help us support life, and also reducing the amount of aggressive tillage we're doing so that we're not really beating up. I don't know if you can see this, but I just came over to this. This is broccoli from last fall that is flowering, and there's a bee visiting the flowers on here. And it's really beautiful, but I don't really know if you can quite see that. But we do have beehives here, and we have a couple different beekeepers that have their hives on the edge of the woods. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed doing is I was able to harvest this broccoli and these cabbages over the fall and winter. We had a fairly mild winter, and now they're flowering. And I've decided to leave them to let them flower so that we have bees that can come and visit and support the pollinator populations in this time when they need food. And then we also, over here, just last year had a row of blueberry plants that came in, and one of the other things that we're doing to try to promote the soil health is planting perennial fruit plants so that things can be in the soil and don't have to be tilled up every year, and give them a chance to have a longer term role in the ecosystem and establish sort of both annual and perennial food crops. And in addition to that, we have a small orchard that's just down this way, and we have apples, primarily apple trees, but 3 different rows of them along the fence here, and they're in their 3rd or 4th year now. And so they gave a little bit of fruit last year, and this year it's possible we'll get a little bit more. And then just right over here in the far fields over there, there's the community gardens have come out, and we've been able to support a number of people to sort of, actually there's someone out there working like a garden right now. But it's great to be able to share the land with others who are also just actively working to grow food for themselves and their family and their communities. And so both we're partnering with the ecosystem here, but also as a society with friends and neighbors and other organizations that Sister Bonnie mentioned, we're all working together to help make this land here both in the best condition it can be, to support our community to be in the best condition that we can make it with the resources we have available. And so I hope that was that was a tolerable virtual tour here for you all. And it was nice for me to get out of the shed for a little bit. And I think I'll pass it off now back to Sister Bonnie or Marie.
Thanks, Eli. I'm so glad, I ran that video not knowing what the quality would be outside, but that was great. Thank you so much. That was really great. So
Sure.
In the interest of time, I know we're supposed to go till about 11:30, and I know Marie has some slides to share yet. I'm going to share my screen again, but I think maybe we're going to forego Rabbi Singer's, because his is a little bit long. So we'll skip over that. There he is. Basically what he would do would share the experience of the farm project from another faith community's involvement in it. And if anybody is interested in hearing him speak, first you should know that this video is not professionally done. Bob Drake had taped Rabbi when we were going to try to do the video ourselves, which was a really bad idea. But I saved this just to be able to share on occasion what Rabbi had to say, because I really thought it was worthwhile hearing. If anyone would like that, I can email it to you, and you can hear him give his thoughts on the project. This last, well, second to last slide, just kind of ties everything together. Down here, the two women who are with me in the cold room are from Resurrected Life Community, and they were here for a pickup to take produce back. Their children's program in the summertime also comes, I think it's once, they have two groups, so they alternate weeks. So the children come every other week for a period of 6 or 7 weeks. So they really enjoy that. It's been great for them. In the lower left side, you see some volunteers from the Day of Caring that the United Way sponsors every year. And we usually have about 60 volunteers for that. This year, it didn't happen. So we are a little bit behind on some of the things out in the field. The young lady in the center, offering you some beets, is inviting you to join us in Feed the Hungry, Care for the Earth, and Grow Healthy Community, which is kind of the mission of the project in a nutshell. And the still photo here is actually a link that takes us out to the internet, to a Channel 69 news clip on the farm project and the new Pick Your Own program. I would like to share that, but it doesn't work well from inside the PowerPoint. So I'm going to try to do what Marianne told me to mitigate that and get out of this and share my screen with the actual video running from the internet. Just in case I can't get back to this. This is our transition slide from the Monocacy Farm Project and our very, very practical, real way of trying to do all the things that Marie was saying. And we have so much more to do. But if we start by doing what's necessary and do what's possible, then suddenly we're doing the impossible. And that is attributed to Francis of Assisi. There's some disagreement as to whether or not he actually said it, but I believe he certainly could have said it because it certainly it speaks to what he did with his life as an individual seeking God, and with his fraternity, which grew into how many Franciscan orders. So I'm going to try to get out of this. I'm going to need to stop my share, start the video, and then get back in. So bear with me for a minute. Marianne, I need your help. So to get from,
What's up? Okay.
so to get from here to,
You hit share
okay,
screen.
I think I want to get to my desktop.
Or just to this.
Or, oh, I can just get to the, oh,
Yeah,
here it
that's
is.
the better way.
Okay, all right. So.
Don't forget to hit the share the audio.
Okay, can you see it?
Yeah, we see it.
You see it?
Slopeside Pub and Grill is now offering curbside pickup. Call 610-824-1557 to place your order, and we'll meet you at your car outside the Summit Lodge. The ultimate convenience to keep enjoying your Slopeside Pub and Grill favorites.
Idea in Northampton County is making the farm to table concept more reachable for more people.
WFMZ's Jamie Stover has that story.
After loading up on kale,
All right, let's look for cucumbers.
Annette Villani was on to the next.
picking the very produce she and her husband will enjoy tonight or tomorrow. It's all organic. New this year at Monocacy Farm in Bethlehem is a You Pick program.
Some nice broccoli.
Milani doesn't have to grow it, but she can still pick it as if she did.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win, actually.
And whatever they harvest, we seek a donation for that amount.
Half of the farm is for You Pick.
The other half, everything we grow there, is for donation to the organizations we support.
Including Trinity Church's soup kitchen. There were salads today. The farm also supports about a dozen homeless shelters and food pantries in the Lehigh Valley.
When they see fresh produce, they light up. They love it.
Annette also happens to volunteer with one of those pantries.
They're used to getting boxed stuff, canned, processed stuff.
Often fresh fruits and vegetables are more expensive than the processed food and harder to get, harder to come by.
Kim Shively volunteers at the farm because it bothers her that fresh produce is out of reach for some people. Picking weeds on the farm is her way of making an impact.
We can talk about it, but it's important to do something about it, too.
The School Sisters of St. Francis launched the Monocacy Farm Project in 2012.
To do something, A, sustainable, B, that would foster community development, and also to be able to serve the needs of the poor.
There's a philosophy among some growers that we should be mindful of why we're producing the food we are growing and how it's to be used.
In this case, it's being used to do a lot of good. Jamie Stover, 69 News.
So I don't know how good the quality was, but were you able to appreciate it at least to some degree? Okay, so I'm going to turn this back to Marie then, and look forward to her next few slides.
Okay, whenever you're ready, Marianne. Okay, and I just, I'm hoping you can hear me, Marianne. Could you confirm that?
I hear you, Marie.
Okay, very good.
I
Okay,
tried muting myself.
Okay, all right. Okay, so to continue on, and this again comes from Laudato Si, and a comment or a portion of it, or all of this is from a portion of the encyclical. And it says here, in some countries, there are positive examples of environmental improvement. And rivers that were polluted for decades have been cleaned up. And I can tell you that that has happened here at the Lehigh River. And they've been working on that for a long time through the folks at the Wildlands Conservancy. So we have an excellent example here. Native woodlands have been restored. And someone here, I think Eli mentioned getting water from the Bethlehem Water Authority, and their water source is in the Poconos, and they have native woodlands there that they do stewardship work on and are very interested in keeping that in a pristine condition because it is a water source. Some landscapes have been beautified, and there's a lot of native plant projects going on. And these, what he says here is these achievements do not solve global problems. And that is true, but each of us can do something. And so by themselves, each project by itself is not going to solve a global problem. When we put them all together, they do provide help, and they show that men and women are still capable of intervening positively, which is what we had with COVID-19, and we can have it again. Next slide. Okay, so what are the realities during the eco-crisis? What are some of the things that we have been doing or that we can do? And as I said, simple steps can provide meaningful results. Think before you buy. That is such a huge one. Do you need it or do you want it? And there is a big difference because we are certainly learning what we can live without. Refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle. We've heard that often. Refusing to take something if you don't need it. Reducing what you buy, what you throw out. Reuse items and recycle. And I know recycling has been impacted because of COVID-19 and because of the situation in China. However, if you call your recyclers, you can find out what they are accepting right now. And evidently, there's a great need for corrugated cardboard. So anyone who is getting things delivered to you, instead of going into a store, check with your recycler. Are they still accepting corrugated cardboard? Because I found out from an EPA email that right now is very important. We're currently making masks from leftover material, old bed sheets, reusing those things in new ways to make a difference. So there is a reuse going on. And I believe my daughter is still on this webinar, and I want to give a shout out to what she is doing and to something that people may not be aware of. But on average, consumers throw away 70 pounds of clothing per year. Globally, we provide 13 million tons of textile waste each year, 95% of which could be reused or recycled. So that goes back to the clothing thing. Do you need it? Do you want it? Or do you want it? And is it something you will use? Finding and using alternatives to single-use plastics. If every faith community, when they had an event, said, please bring water bottles, because almost all of us have them, you could cut back on the number of single-use plastic water bottles that you order for each of your events. Keep some, because some people may forget water bottles, they may need water, but you could drastically cut back on single-use plastics if you encourage participants to bring their own water bottles. Using compost and organic fertilizers, some of us are doing it, you heard it there on the farm, has great benefits to the soil. Landscaping with native plants, we talked about that, supports the beneficial insects, and Eli was great where he talked about leaving up the broccoli plants. They were flowering and they are helping beneficial insects. Native plants are readily available, and you will get that information in the resource sheet that I'll be handing out. Planting more trees. There's Doug Tallamy is a professor down at the University of Delaware, and he has written a couple of books, and one of them is called Bringing Nature Home. And I'll send that in the resource page. On what Doug says, if you could plant one tree, plant an oak tree, because the animals and the insects that an oak tree supports are in the hundreds. Insects that we would never see, but benefit from the planting of oak trees. And I think it's specifically white oaks. I have a number of white oaks on my property, and I can tell you there's a lot going on here. And buying products from ethical manufacturers and growers, coffee and tea, the Rainforest Alliance, clothing, they have organizations that you can check to see if clothing is being made sustainably and if the people that make the clothing are being treated fairly. Supporting your local farmers, sustainable forestry products, which equals paper, sustainable cardboard boxes, and sustainable building materials. And there are two programs. One is called the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, SFI, or the Forest Stewardship Council. And if you see those things on the cardboard, like your cereal boxes, your cracker boxes, and I have some examples here that I don't know that you can see. I'm going to show it up, but if you're looking at my slide, you may not be able to see it. But you can find these things readily, and they help with keeping sustainable forestry in the forefront and helping those communities with work and also keeping that forest going. Next slide. Okay, some other things you can do. And these are all things that are readily available that you can do now. Painting with non-toxic, low VOC, which is volatile organic chemicals, in paints and finishes and cleaning supplies, which equals less off-gassing. Off-gassing meaning the chemicals in those products are continuing to release while you are using it, which puts gases into the air from those chemicals. And those are things that you breathe in. And so if you've heard about sick building syndrome, a lot of that had to do with off-gassing, which also could be contributed to carpeting that's been put in. And carpet companies have come a long way with that. You can now do recycled carpeting, And they also realized that they had to look at the glues and the backings on wall-to-wall carpeting and lessen or change the toxicity of some of the glues and some of the materials they used. Repairing leaky faucets and plumbing fixtures with water sense fixtures, which is a designation for how much water those appliances use. Installing rain gardens, small gardens, large gardens in your area that are able to collect water. Porous paving, which means that the water goes through the paving and infiltrates into the ground. And we do that to control stormwater runoff, and I've already explained what that is. There are more electric and hybrid vehicles available, a hybrid at this point being gas and electric. When I talk about an electric car, research that. You don't have to buy a Tesla. Most of us can't afford a Tesla, but there are so many others that are coming on board, and that equals cleaner air. Using energy efficient light bulbs and fixtures, use of ceiling fans during warm weather, and also sometimes in the winter where the heat rises, and so you can bring that heat down to the lower level of your buildings. Evaluating energy efficient and less carbon impact heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, HVAC. Think about that when you go to replace what you currently have or if it needs to be replaced. Purchasing from renewable energy providers for homes and buildings, and there are plenty of renewable energy providers out there, and you can actually purchase renewable energy through your current electric company. And electric companies now are basically going with renewables to power their electric facilities, which means they are reducing their carbon, and that means you reduce your carbon. So purchasing renewable energy can be a great asset to anyone, and it's easy to do. Renewable energy being solar and wind primarily. And installing renewable energy sources, solar, wind, and geothermal, geoexchange and geothermal, which is taking the heat and the coolness from the ground and using it to either heat or cool your home. I have that heating system in my home. So I will send you some links on how you can learn more about renewable energy sources and how you might be able to fund them, and that will be in the resource page. Next. Okay, Marianne is going to run this video, and this video is faith communities and what they are doing about their stormwater runoff. And I know I showed it to the bishop when I met with him. He really liked this video. I think you're going to learn a lot about it for those of you who are involved with faith communities, and how can you mitigate stormwater that's running off your property. Okay, Marianne.
Well, I think we start with Genesis 1 in the creation. The world was created by God, we believe, and we, humankind, were given responsibility for its care.
There's a core center to the faith community of caring for creation. And we understand that through water, we're all connected to each other. Water is sacred, it's symbolic in most of our religious traditions. And as a result of that, the faith community is very drawn to trying to protect this resource.
Depending on your study, 65 to 85% of the stormwater runoff comes from private property. So local governments, state governments could do everything they wanted if they had the money, which they don't, and still not save the bay. So until we start chipping away at the private property, like churches and businesses and schools that have big parking lots and big roofs, we don't have a chance.
In our county, it's pretty much an all-payer system. If you own property and there's any sort of hard surfaces on it, then you do get assessed a fee. We've got the revenue going into what's called a dedicated fund, and once it's in there, it's going to go to the projects that we've identified around the county to clean up our polluted runoff going into our creeks.
Because nonprofits have a social mission, we wanted to work with them on a solution that allowed them some financial relief, but also got the improvements to the watershed.
If you just think about the dollar obligations It's really easy to conclude yet another tax. No one wants another tax, but it's not just to bring in revenue for the government, but to actually see these things built.
We talked about the partnership as opposed to a mandate. And so we talked about alternative compliance. We are talking about educate or re-educate, if you will, our congregants, as well as the community in which our churches are located in. I shared with the church on Sunday, this past Sunday, is that when we throw trash out of the window, we have sinned. When we even pour oil down into the sewer and polluting the water, that's sin because we are destroying God's creation. They never looked at it quite that way. And so what I see here is a new attitude of change that I know can take place and will take place.
In a heavy rainstorm of an inch or more, you'll probably have at least 30, 40 toxic chemicals flowing here, lead, cadmium, PCBs. Plus, you have a lot of pet waste in downtown. People walk their dogs, they have their cats that roam free, and all of that gunk goes into the waters. The storm water is not treated. That's an important thing. People think it goes to a sewage treatment plant. It does not. We don't have combined sanitary sewers here. We were able to get excellent landscape design people in here and work to put a plan together that the parish found acceptable without taking out one parking space. And we got a grant from the Maryland Department of Environment. If we can do it here on this large parking lot, people can do it anywhere.
We're able to retain 97% of the runoff from the non-pervious surfaces of our property here at Heritage Baptist. The Bay is one of the largest economic engines in our community. So by protecting that, we are protecting sustainability for the future. We are protecting our children's future.
You have to act on what you believe. So Jewish tradition teaches us that we must be stewards of the earth, that one of the core original values of the Jewish tradition is honoring the beauty of the physical world.
I'm not a rabbi, but there's a saying in Judaism, from Lador Vador, from generation to generation. So I think it kind of speaks to we're trying to care for our natural resources and other things to make them sustainable so that the next generations can enjoy them and benefit from them.
The thing is it takes all of us. It takes every single person making a difference on their property to really make a difference for the Chesapeake Bay.
Doing positive and good environmental projects is a healthy way to define the mission of your congregation and helping people to reconnect with the earth that we have in common and something larger than ourselves.
Okay, and my last slide, Marianne. Okay, so I think from what you have learned from Sister Bonnie's presentation, from Eli's presentation, from what you just heard in this video, we need to consider the impact on our community and the global community, and of what you purchase, where you purchase, and the actions you take. If you do that, if every human being on this planet, and especially in this country, just considered and thought about what they do, we can make a huge impact. And again, I go back to COVID-19. Look at what we did in 2.5 months. It didn't stop people from getting sick completely. It did not stop deaths from happening, the people that died from this disease, but we certainly lessened it. And if we could do that in response to the pandemic, which we knew nothing about, and we know so much more now about the eco-crisis, about climate warming, think about what we can do. And I've given you examples, Sister Bonnie has given you examples. So there are things, it's possible, it is possible, and I think all of us can take that step and take some actions and really follow to the letter what Pope Francis is asking of us in Laudato Si. Thanks very much. I want to give a special thanks to Sister Verge, who was, I believe, the executive director when I first started working on this, who has been a champion for this the whole time and kept working at this, attending night meetings after a long day when truly she was so tired and said, no, I'm coming, I'm going to participate in this. And I also want to thank Father Krivak, who I believe is still with us, who from the faith communities, and my faith in particular, has been a champion for this and kept encouraging me to continue on with this work and has supported it, and I greatly appreciate it. So thanks to everyone who participated.